It's just great to see all of you. Well, thank you. I'm for those of you who don't know me, I'm Wynn Lewis. I'm rector, pastor of Christ in St. Luke's, and where Frances Dilley now is in residence, and one of our preachers and her husband Jim Dilley just rotated off as our board chair. So it's what a blessing it is to have them, and through Frances to get to know the Reverend Dr. Tom Lewis. I'm sure that Tom and I are cousins way back in the old country, but with all those good Lewises and the Welsh. And we're talking about, we're actually picking up a theme that we were going to do last year, but it has more relevance this year with a lot of the mental and spiritual health issues that people have been facing during this time of lockdown. And so I'm very grateful to welcome you, Tom Lewis.
Thank you.
Who was a professor of spirituality at Columbia Seminary. Tom is a Presbyterian minister whom I think is attending the Episcopal Church in Brevard, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
You had to say that, didn't you?
Maybe that's a secret. I'm sorry.
You get me in trouble.
I love that Episcopal Church in Brevard, North Carolina.
Oh, it's a great church. I love it.
And part of this third Sunday discussion is to open up topics, but also have the option of continuing to explore them with the speaker in a smaller group setting. And so, if there is some interest as a result of today on exploring more about depression and spirituality, and maybe even more personally, Tom has offered to continue to do a series, and certainly Christ in St. Luke's is happy to remunerate that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is you can send me a private at the end. You can send me a private message via Zoom, or you can just send me an email or a text message. My number is 757-286-8897, and I'll put that in the chat as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the Reverend Frances Dilley to introduce Tom a little more formally.
A little more formally. I'm not sure.
Or informally.
Thank you, Wynn. I appreciate you, and I appreciate this opportunity. And Tom, welcome. I'm delighted that you are kicking off this exciting series for our church family. Welcome to the Christ in St. Luke's community, and a special welcome to those in Brevard who are joining us, and actually others too who are not part of this community in Norfolk or your community and friends in Brevard. But we're so glad that you have offered to do this for us, to tell us your story. And my formal introduction of you, you're my friend. And we got to know each other through a spiritual giant in our lives, Ben Campbell Johnson, who was a mentor for us. And he got us together over 20 years ago, invited his friends to get together on retreat once a year. And we have grown to love and admire each other, and many others that are very important in our lives that we share. So I've heard your story before, and I know it will be important for those who are on the Zoom call today to hear that story and hear your message of hope. So thank you, Tom, for joining us.
Thank you, Frances. I'm your friend.
Yeah, you're my friend, and I'm going to try to keep time. And I'm going to give you all the time to talk, but I'll give you about a 5-minute warning so that you can take any questions that people might have at the end. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good.
Okay.
I'm sure there won't be any questions, but we'll see. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you on video, virtually. It's let me tell you that Zoom is a stretch for me. And I'm not accustomed to teaching by Zoom. I've done a lot of meetings, but I've never been one to give a presentation on Zoom. So if my volume is not right or whatever, I hope you'll figure a way to let me know. So I just, I don't want to say anything else except that am very humbled to be and honored to be invited to do this. I know what caliber people you have that teach and preach at St. Luke's, and when I told Sebring about that, Sebring, my wife Sebring, she's right here on the screen, and I said, "Gee, Sebring, I just don't know about that. I think those people are in a different category than me." And she said, "Well, it's okay, honey. Everybody makes a mistake once in a while." So I want to tell you that I don't believe this is a mistake. I feel very much led to be here today. I hope that the reason is that there's a message for somebody. I never count on more than one person, but if one person hears something today that helps their life, then that's my goal has been accomplished. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to talk about depression. I'm going to talk about spirituality. And I heard you had Stephen Ministries. I was speaking to a church in Atlanta, to their Stephen Ministry program, and they had like 40 Stephen ministers. It was a big deal. And as they were gathering, one said to another, "What's our subject tonight?" And she said, "Well, it's depression." "Depression? That's so depressing," she said. And if we just talked about depression, it would be depressing. But we want to talk about hope, and that comes from that. We are in a situation that's different than anything I've ever known. Probably most of you also. We're in a threshold, liminal experience. We're moving from one world to another world. We're going from before COVID to after COVID, and I hope we're going to after COVID, and we don't know what that's going to be like. But we're standing in between, and that causes disorientation. And we know how much loss there's been. People have lost their loved ones. People have lost their businesses. They've lost their income. They've lost friends, just all kinds of things. And we have, in addition to the pandemic, we have political upheaval and just all kinds of things going on. It's a hard time. And what does all this have to do with depression? Well, one word, a four-letter word: loss. There is so much loss, and loss leads to grief. Loss leads to depression, and you don't ever know which is which sometimes until after a while. But there's so much loss. Depression, as you probably know, strikes everywhere. It strikes all ages, all classes, incomes, education levels, ordained and lay. Everybody's life is touched by this illness. Everybody's life. 50% of the families in America will have someone who is depressed in their lifetime. And we know that suicide's on the increase. We know that homicide's on the increase. We know that domestic violence is on the increase. And I'm sure that depression is on the increase. Already we have something like 300 million people in the world who are depressed. And 50 to 70% of them are not treated. So that's a serious problem. And we're up to about 800,000 suicides a year throughout the world. That's not just the United States. So what is it that makes depression so deadly, so hard to deal with? Well, it's silent. And you can't measure depression with a blood pressure cuff or a blood test. It's has to be known by its symptoms. And there's a great fear of talking about depression because there's a shame associated with it and also a stigma. So I was when I was writing my dissertation on depression and spirituality, people kept asking me what I was writing about, and I was embarrassed to tell them. They'd ask me, and I'd say, "Oh, I don't know. I haven't decided yet," or something like that. And then one day I realized that dissertations are published, and that soon everybody would know what I was writing about. But why did I not want to tell them? I was afraid of the next question. The next question would be, why? Why are you writing about depression? And then I would have to tell them that I had been through a serious bout with depression. But nobody ever asked me that. Everybody that asked me about why I was writing, and I told them depression, they kind of tilted their head to one side and had a faraway look in their eye and told me a story of darkness, a story of pain for somebody they knew, somebody in their family, or for themselves. And it happened that way every time. And I knew that I'd hit a nerve here with that subject. I'm going to talk primarily about major depression. You know, depression is divided into reactive depressions and clinical depressions, and the reactive depression is when you are reacting to something in your environment. The clinical depression is more brain chemistry and we call it chemical imbalance. It's been called a lot of things, and there are also other types, bipolar depression and postpartum depression. There's a long-term low-grade depression that just kind of stays around. And there's one that's cyclic, but not as big a swings as bipolar. So there are a lot of different kinds of depression. I like to use a metaphor when talking about major depression, and that's an earthquake. You think about it. An earthquake, when an earthquake is coming, you usually know. You might get a tremor or two, shake the house a little bit, and then it goes on, and no permanent damage. But then sometimes it comes and it shakes the house and knocks the dishes off the cabinet and moves the furniture around a little bit, and it scares you to death. But then it goes on without too much damage. And then one day it might strike without warning, and the house will shake to its foundations, and the ground opens up, and you fall into the great abyss. And that's what happens with depression a lot of times. It's a toxic cloud that hangs over us that blocks the sunshine. William Styron wrote a book called Sophie's Choice. He also wrote a book called Darkness Visible. If you ever get a chance, read that book. He says that unless you have, that depression is so painful that unless you have actually been there, it's almost impossible to understand. And so depression is known by its symptoms. And so I'm going to ask Frances if she'll put the symptoms up there. I'm going to run through these quickly. Now, just a warning. I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and every time we'd have a new drug, we'd study the diseases that it was indicated for. And you talk about the symptoms of the disease, and every time I would know that I had that disease. It's just the way it works. So don't let me talk you into anything, but you may identify with some of these symptoms. The first, of course, is a depressed mood, and that's being pushed down. You've got a heavy load on your back. You can't move the way you want to. It's hard. It's a hard place to be. Then the next one is a markedly diminished interest or pleasure. Now let me go back to the first one. The depressed mood is not a bad day. It's not when things don't go right at the office, or you want to kick the dog, or that kind of thing. That's not it. You go down and you stay down with that type of depressed mood. Markedly diminished interest or pleasure. I used to like the Braves, but I've just about given up on them. What would be your team around here? What baseball team would everybody pull for in Norfolk? I can't hear anybody.
Don't get us started. There is none.
There is none. Okay. Well, maybe football. Anyway, the point is that you are really interested in something, and or something gives you a great deal of pleasure, and then all of a sudden you could care less about it. I gave up on the Braves, but that's not because of my depression, because they never do win. But anyway, a markedly diminished interest or pleasure. The third one is kind of tricky because it can go either way. It's a significant weight loss or significant weight gain. It's an increase or a decrease in appetite. You either can't get enough to eat, or you don't want anything to eat. And so that throws the clinicians off because they never know which one they're dealing with. And the next one is similar in that it can go either way. It can be insomnia or hypersomnia. You either can't sleep at night, or you can't stop sleeping during the daytime or at night. All the time you sleep. So that's another tricky one. I can remember when I was suffering from depression, there would be a good night would be 2 hours sleep. A bad night would be 15 minutes sleep. And then you drag your body through the day, the next day, and that significantly impacts your depressed mood. Some bigger words here: psychomotor agitation or retardation. We have chaplains and trained people in this area, and you know what that is. It's either agitation or put down, slowed down. And that's another symptom of depression. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. It doesn't mean you're tired on Friday night or Sunday afternoon for the preachers in the bunch. It means you are exhausted almost every day. And the most painful, I think, are the feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt that come along with depression. Henry Nouwen calls that self-loathing. And I don't know why we turn everything in on ourselves when we're depressed, but it seems to work that way, that we blame everything on me and feel those really difficult rejection of self. And that may be the hardest to handle of all the group. You're fuzzy a lot, not all the time, but you have a diminished ability to think or concentrate, or you have indecisiveness. You're fuzzy. You have moments of clarity, but this is why people advise you when you're depressed not to make big decisions, because you just aren't thinking. Your thinking is skewed. It's out of whack. And then recurrent thoughts of death, not necessarily suicide or fear of dying, not just fear of dying, but just a morbid kind of sense of thinking about focusing on death. Now, the Psychiatric Association says that when you have 5 of these, and either 1 or 2 within those 5, that you're clinically depressed. That's the formal definition. So I think I had all of them. So depression is silent. It sneaks up on us. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to share because of the stigma and the shame that goes with it. So what do we do about it? Francis, you can take those down if you want, unless somebody would like you to keep them up. Okay. Now, I've probably got you completely depressed by now. And if you're not, you probably should be. How do you get help for depression? Well, you go to your doctor. You go, your first trip is to the doctor for a physical, because there are other things that mimic depression, and you might be suffering from something else. You should never try to diagnose yourself, and I certainly couldn't diagnose anyone. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a PhD in this field. So I would never try to diagnose someone. I can see signs and symptoms, and I can ask them if they've considered that possibility. I did that one day. I was having lunch with a dentist, and I knew from his wife that he got up early in the morning before the kids got up, he went to work. He worked all day long, came home for supper, and went to bed every day. Same routine. Never saw the kids. They were always outside. I mean, out of his range of motion. So I was having lunch with him, and I suggested that he might be depressed. And he said to me, depressed? That's what lazy people have when they don't want to work. So people have very different ideas about this. And being lazy is one of the great myths of depression. And the other great myth is lack of faith. That that's not true. That's just not true. So we go to our doctor, we get a diagnosis, and we can talk to the doctor about referral to a counselor or therapist or pastoral counselor, because talk therapy is important. I've talked to some people who would rather be sick than take medication, and that's sad because there's so many good medications out there now, and so your doctor may want to put you on that. I think a spiritual advisor is very critical to this whole thing, because this is an illness that not only affects you physically, but it also hammers your soul. It crushes your soul. So you have to use every weapon that you can get your hands on, every resource to fight this monster. And I call it a monster. I'm going to just share my story with you a little bit. I usually read it because I have a hard time telling it. It's as you might imagine, it's kind of sensitive for me, but I'm going to try this. Today I'm writing at a table in our mountain home. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. When I look out the big window in front of me, I see sunshine on the new leaves of spring. I see new life everywhere as dogwoods bloom and wildflowers like columbine and trillium put out blossoms. The hosta and ferns of last year begin to send up green shoots. I see birds building nests and hear the shuddering honks of geese as they land in the field behind the house. I see the wind, but most of all, I see light. But there was a time for me when the light went out and darkness reigned. It was a late, dark night in August when I left the church after a meeting. My wife, Sebring, was a deacon in the church that I pastored, and she was in this meeting, but we took separate cars home. She left while I closed up the church. And I'm sure none of you have to close up the church, but I had to close up the church. On the way home, I passed an automobile accident. There were flashing lights everywhere. A car had been hit on the driver's side in the front section, right around the headlight, and it was in a ditch like this. Can you see that? Like this. I don't know how to hold there, like that. And I was very relieved when they waved me around and I could go on home and didn't have to deal with the situation. But when I got home, a few minutes later, I became very confused because Sebring wasn't there. She left before me, and she wasn't there. Where could she be? Could she have stopped to see someone? Maybe. Or had she stopped at the grocery store? I doubted it. Then it began to come through to me, that car. Could it have been her car? No, surely not. But it was the same color. But surely it wasn't. Maybe it was. I turned around and headed back. When I got there, I found Sebring standing on the lawn next to the accident. When I reached her, she was shaking terribly. Her arms and face were covered with blood. The paramedics assured us she had no serious injuries. The windshield had splintered into lots of little pieces of glass, and she had glass in her hair and in her clothes and all over herself. So they sent us to the emergency room where they treated an abrasion on one eye and cleaned up the cuts, and she was frightened, as you might guess, and shaken. But she was going to be okay. But I wasn't. I wasn't going to be okay. It took a while for me to realize it, but all during this incident, I felt nothing. No anxiety, no fear, no hurt, no apprehension, no empathy, no anger, nothing. I was dead inside, and now I knew I was depressed. The first sure sign of trouble had come earlier in the year. I was alone in my study praying about a funeral that I had just conducted. Robert Kingsley, he was 3 years old and had been enrolled in a special program at our church. And Robert was different. He had spina bifida. And then one night he just stopped breathing. And his parents were not people of faith. They were completely hopeless and devastated. There was no comfort for them. They were completely without hope. But something about their pain and opened me up. And I started crying. And I couldn't stop. So I called a counselor who had just moved to town, and I thought we were going to be good friends, but she became my counselor instead. And I began counseling in early spring, and she kept going back to depression, but I wouldn't accept it. And it wasn't until August with the automobile accident that I realized that I was depressed. So my doctor put me on antidepressant medications, and I took 4 or 5 over the next 3 years because every time I got on one, it would start working and then I'd have a side effect. And I switched. So then I'd be back right where it was a roller coaster. But the talk therapy gave me a place to explore all kinds of things. And I found that I had never grieved and that I had no idea how to take care of myself emotionally. And I learned. I didn't even know that loving myself was an important part of life. I pushed hard to do God's work, but never thought about how I was part of that work. I came to understand depression as an illness that often has effect on the blood chemistry. And the antidepressants help that. And But there was something else that happened during this time that I want to share with you, because it's the other part of this. It's the part about our spiritual life, and depression is deadly for the spiritual life. It affects faith and hope and love, and it brings on self-loathing, and we lose our identity as well as our energy to do anything. So I had a friend who took me to the monastery once a month, and we spent the night, and we got a private rooms, and we would gather at night and we would pray together, and we would pray the Psalms, and praying those Psalms gave me enough hope to make it through until the next time. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but there's an important thing that I need to say right here. The most important thing that I learned is that you should never, ever try to handle depression on your own. Don't do it alone. If you do, you're playing with something that's very dangerous. So don't try to do it alone. It's hard to take responsibility for your illness when you're fuzzy-headed and have no energy, and all you can do is drag around, and you can't make good decisions. But it's important that you do take responsibility for it. My wife is very smart. She was very supportive of me. She was always there. But I had the responsibility for my illness. And that meant that she didn't make my doctor's appointments or call for my medication or anything like that. I had to take care of that. I had to take responsibility. And that's hard because you're at a place where you are least able to do that. And so, but that's the way it went. And that helped a lot. That helped a lot. Spirituality. Faith dies, hope withers, love is impossible, self-loathing is overwhelming. That's what someone who wrote a book on women and depression said about the spiritual life. So the great good news for me was that I had a spiritual advisor who helped me and was there for me. And I learned about praying the Psalms. Now, the Psalms are, you know about the Psalms. You open the Bible right to the middle and you get the Psalms, usually, unless it has a study guide to it. But the Psalms are prayers, they're poetry, they're songs. They were used in ancient Israel to cry out to God. They were individual and they were communal, and Walter Brueggemann has divided the Psalms into three groups: Psalms of orientation, Psalms of disorientation, and Psalms of reorientation. And that's important because the Psalms of disorientation contain the Psalms of lament. And the Psalms of lament are what helped me so much through this difficult time. And a lament is not like a dirge. A lament is a cry for help from someone who believes that God is going to come and help them. And so at the monastery, we read Psalms of Lament all the time. And I read them all the time. And in the little book that I published a book on all of this. You can't see it, but you can go on Amazon and get it for about 39 cents if you get a used copy. But in the back of that are many spiritual exercises using the Psalms that you can just pick up and read them and use them like that. So the Psalms of Lament, I wish we had more time. How am I doing, Francis?
You're doing great. You've got about, I would say about 12 minutes if you want to give people about 5 minutes at the end for questions, but you keep on going. What you're doing is great.
Okay. I'm going to share a Psalm of Lament with you. It's the one that is most characteristic of the Psalms of Lament, and I want you to listen to what happens in this psalm. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord, my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Here's a tortured soul from thousands of years ago that may be feeling the same thing we feel when we have depression or anxiety or despair. But I want you to notice what happens in this psalm. It starts with God hiding his face and pain in my soul, and it ends with singing and praising God. So what happens in that? In 6 verses, they go from despair to hope. And I found in these Psalms, I found healing. I found a model for healing because they allow me to pour out my soul and to receive hope in return. Now, the scholars will argue all about how that works and why and so forth, but I know why. My faith tells me that God has heard my prayer. I wish we had time to talk about these and to work with these. I have to share the gift of depression, which is something that it took me a very long time to discover. Ben Johnson told me once that, Tom, one day you will say this is the best thing that ever happened to you. Don't say that to people. I wanted to kill him. I really did. But now I can say that he was almost right. He was almost right. I left my church before I got out of the driveway. Charlie Shedd was on the phone asking me to preach 8 weeks for him. while he completed a book. And Sebring and I drove each week to this church, and then they wanted to call me as pastor, and so we were going to take a year off, but we ended up with about 9 months. But we went to that church, and I was there for 10 years, and it was a smaller church, and pastors don't go from larger churches to smaller churches. That's just not done. But we did it, and the thing that helped us was that I had the time to work on my Doctor of Ministry in Spirituality, working under Ben Johnson at Columbia Seminary. And I studied spirituality, and then later they came back to me and asked me to direct that same program that I had been studying in. And that was a changed my life. And so I went to Columbia and was there my last 4 years of work. So that's the gift of depression. Also, my ministry was completely changed when I published the little book on depression, because all of a sudden people wanted to talk to me, and people wanted me to come and speak, and people wanted to get in my office to talk to me. And it was wild, but I became very popular, and I didn't know how to handle that. But anyway, it changed my ministry, and so forth. It changed my life. I'm going to leave you with some things that may be helpful. I'm going to call these hygiene for depression. And the first one, I'm going to say, do what I say and not what I do. And the first one is eliminate alcohol if you're depressed. So that's a hard one. But exercise is almost as good as antidepressants. Now they are treating people by putting them in the forest. Spending time in nature can help with the symptoms of depression. I think that a journal, that you keep up with what's going on with you, and your prayers and how things are going, and I think that's very important. And of course, prayer. So to summarize, depression is devastating and widespread. Many people who are depressed are not adequately treated. You heard my story about going from there to there. There are many, many, many medical, psychological, and spiritual resources out there for you to draw on. And think about them as boxing gloves. Put them on and fight that monster. Use everything you can. The Psalms are both prayer and scripture, and they can offer hope. Hope for that long journey. One thing to take home, if you don't take anything else home today, is don't try to do it by yourself. And the last thing is that Scripture tells us that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. Amen. I'm through, Francis.
Amen.
And if I could just interject, thank you so much, Tom, for sharing so much of yourself. In the discussion, please don't forget to unmute yourself before you talk.
Thank you, Tom. It was everything and more than I imagined you could share with us in less than an hour. So well done, well organized.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love how you summarized it. And I'm just thinking, I think I heard you say 50% of all of us either have experienced or know someone who is experiencing.
Yeah.
And I wonder, for those of us who are sitting here, knowing someone that we might be able to come alongside and help, what would you suggest would be something that we could do to help someone and encourage someone?
I think if you can talk to them about it, if they will talk to you about it, everybody needs to talk about this stuff. Everybody needs to tell their story about what they've gone through with depression. And that's what I wish we could do now, because when I tell my story, it gives other people permission to tell their story. But that's the main thing, Francis, or they could buy one of my books and give it to them.
39 cents. I love that you said that.
I'm embarrassed to say that.
I'm going to post the link on the chat before we close today, and we'll post it also on our website, the link to your book, Tom. And
okay.
If some folks would like, I can set up another Zoom where we can share our own stories with Tom as well. And so I will be doing that as well. Excuse me for interjecting.
Thank you, Wynn. I'm just wondering if anybody has a question for Tom. We've got a couple of minutes, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer anything that you would like to ask him. Just remember to unmute.
What was the number of that psalm, please?
The psalm was 13. I don't even know who asked that question.
Thank you. I did. Thank you.
Okay. Sue. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
It's 13. But there are many that are equally as good, 130 and 77 and 42 and 43. And there are just several that are real good. 22.
You really know them. Thank you. You live with them.
Have you found that men in general have a harder time dealing with, number one, admitting depression, but also getting help from it?
Thank you for that question. That's something I should have talked about, because women have depression much greater frequency than men. And that may be because men just aren't diagnosed with it. And they do have a harder time with it, but it's not as frequent in men. So, if that helps.
One of the things I've heard, Tom, just tagging on to Emily's question, is I've heard that for some men, not all, but for some men, depression can manifest initially as anger. Is that something that rings true for you, or you've seen either in yourself or others?
I've said it. That's especially true in teenagers, and which is hard to sort out because they're kind of angry anyway, But anger can come pouring out at any time during depression. I mean, just the least little thing can trigger it, and there's got to be a lot of anger buried down there. But yes, it does present, very often presents as anger in men. In women, it's more depressed mood.
It makes me wonder about all the anger we're seeing in older men right now. And that gets projected onto politics and those kinds of things. Just something that I've been circulating in my mind.
Was that a question?
Really a comment. I think I just find myself wondering about the prevalence that it may be. Depression may be much more prevalent than in men than we realize.
I think this disorientation that comes with threshold experiences, with changes that we're going through, I think that can generate anger and all kinds of confusion and all kinds of stuff. And I think it's a product very much of what's happening to us. We can wait.
Silence is good.
We can wait till you're ready. I want to just say before we have to end that I feel honored to be here today and to see your faces. I think Zoom is a poor substitute for face-to-face, but it allows us to see each other, and that's a beginning. So,
Wynn, I have a question. Is depression driven by something that could have happened in your life? An incident in your life that causes you to be depressed all the time?
it certainly can be. Very often it is, yes. Did I answer your question? Whoever asked it?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay.
It was another Lewis, Tom.
Okay. Gosh, we got a lot of us. There are a lot of us around today.
Thank you, Tom. I'm aware of the time. And I would also like to remind those who are participating that if anyone, especially part of the Christ in St. Louis community, as Wynn said when we began, if you are interested in knowing more about depression or sharing your own story, please talk to Wynn about that. He has given his cell number. He's great to text with. He can get back to you quickly if you're interested, and he will put something together for us with Tom to guide us in that and through that. I'd love to offer a little prayer as we end. Would that be okay with you Presbyterians and Episcopalians all?
Go for it.
Again, Tom,
Hey, Francis.
yeah.
Before you do that, could someone tell us a little bit about this center in Brevard, where you're based out of?
Tom?
It's like a retreat center.
Oh, the Center for Spiritual Wisdom.
Yes.
It's a nonprofit that Rob, an Episcopal priest, started about 4 years ago, and I've been working with them, and we're doing all kinds of programs, and we can do retreats, and the main focus so far has been centering prayer and the Enneagram, but we've got we've got all kinds of things coming up, and you can get that on the website. Just spiritual, Center for Spiritual Wisdom.
Is it actually a facility, or is it just a you know,
It moves a lot.
Say
We
again?
have offices that we use, and then we use space conference centers and things as we need them.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Father, thank you for the gift of this day and for the gift of your faithfulness and love for Tom. Thank you for using him today to remind us of your power and grace and the hope that we can experience even in our darkest places through the gift of your word, and especially through the gift of the words of the Psalms. Lord, I ask your blessing on Tom and for all those who have a story to tell. May we recognize them and come alongside them to hear those stories. And as we hear, may your healing touch be upon us. We love you, Lord, and we thank you again. We offer this prayer in this day to you in your holy and powerful name, Lord Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you, Francis, for introducing us to Tom Lewis. And Tom, thank you for your kindness and your willingness to be with us. I think this is a very helpful introduction. And I am going to work with you to set up a concrete time, because sometimes people, when they have a concrete time, they might just duck in to do some further exploration. And the other topic I'd like to chat with you about is I'm aware of the tremendous amount of depression among our youth right now as a result of the isolation of this lockdown. So I know that parents maybe might find this very helpful as well. So thank you very much, and I'll follow up with you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Blessings.
Blessings.
Have a beautiful day.